Encounters with the unexplained.
People in this country who don't know that President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. What's even more incredible is that after 38 years and an official government pronouncement that a lone assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was the murderer, no one knows for certain who really killed Kennedy.
Was the Warren Commission appointed by Lyndon Johnson to get to the truth of the Kennedy assassination, or to make sure no one gets to the truth? Why were the findings of the commission sealed for 75 years? Were they merely trying to fit the evidence into a prearranged conclusion? Was President John F. Kennedy assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, or was Oswald merely a patsy?
Even today, conspiracy theories abound, and the only clear agreement seems to be that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone assassin. We'll take a look at the latest evaluation of the forensic and scientific evidence in just a moment. Stay with us. In just a moment, we'll see if we can finally reveal who killed Kennedy on this episode of Encounters with the Unexplained.
Encounters with the Unexplained.
Those of us who remember that horrible day in November of 1963 find it hard to grasp the reality that there are tens of thousands of Americans who were born, raised, educated, and had their own families after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So indelibly is the event locked in our minds that these images seem to have happened only yesterday. But whether you find it to be new information or old news, these next few minutes are going to enlighten, surprise, shock, and perhaps even make you just a little bit angry. The official version of what happened, according to the Warren Commission report, is that Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy from a sniper's position on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, killing Kennedy and wounding Texas Governor John Connally.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
From the very day of the assassination, indeed almost from the very moment, questions were raised about what really happened. According to modern investigators, the Warren Commission report left virtually all of those questions unanswered. The American media, however, has for the most part consistently branded anyone who questions the Warren report a crackpot or a conspiracy freak. Do they know something they're not telling us? Was Lee Harvey Oswald the lone gunman who shot and killed President Kennedy?
According to the Warren report, Lee Oswald scored 2 hits, firing 3 shots in 6 seconds with an Italian-made Mannlicher Carcano. Not only were master marksmen unable to replicate Oswald's feat, but Oswald's weapon was a medium to low velocity weapon and could not have inflicted the damage to the president's skull.
Why did the Warren Commission insist that Oswald somehow accomplished what their own master marksmen were unable to do?
The foundation of the Warren report, of course, is the single bullet theory. The idea that a bullet coming downward passed through Kennedy's neck unhindered and went on to cause all these wounds to Governor John Connally. This bullet, which was found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital in a public hallway, was pristine. It was unmarked. And yet, supposedly, it had passed through Kennedy, shattered Connally's 5th rib and his right wrist.
For the same bullet to have hit Governor Connally, it would have had to change directions and defy the laws of physics. Governor Connally insisted to his death that he was not hit by the same bullet.
If that's so obvious, why didn't the Warren Commission investigators simply eliminate that theory? Could it be because more than one bullet means more than one assassin, hence a conspiracy?
Interestingly enough, the Warren Commission interviewed numerous people in Dealey Plaza except for the most conspicuous ones, such as a man who seemed to be talking on a walkie-talkie, a man pumping an umbrella up and down almost as if a signal, and a man shaking his fist at Kennedy. One of these witnesses that was never contacted by the Warren Commission was a soldier named Gordon Arnold. He told me that he had gone to film the motorcade and had walked up on the grassy knoll and went behind the picket fence when he encountered a man in a suit and tie who he thought was Secret Service, and the man ordered him to leave, so Gordon went around and stood in front of the fence. Gordon told me that as he stood there watching the motorcade approach, a shot went off right over his left shoulder, Now, he had just completed basic training, and as a soldier, he certainly knew what live ammunition sounded like, and so he immediately hit the ground. Many witnesses in Dealey Plaza told of shots from other than the Texas Schoolbook Depository. All this would indicate that Kennedy was shot from the front, not the back.
The president's autopsy has been a source of controversy in that regard, which extends to the autopsy x-rays, which were fabricated to conceal a massive blowout to the back of the head caused by a shot fired from in front. Charles Crenshaw, MD, who assisted in treating the president at Parkland Hospital, has described the hole at the back of his head as the size of your fist when you double it up, or about as large as a baseball. But the autopsy photographs and the x-rays do not show it. The autopsy record was falsified.
These official autopsy photos show JFK's head intact. His hair is relatively clean, there's a real absence of blood, and there's only a small red spot to the back rear of his skull. The Warren Commission started out with the premise that there was a lone gunman, someone shooting from behind President Kennedy. A gaping wound to the back of his skull would indicate an exit wound or a shot coming from the front.
Could the x-rays and photos from the autopsy have been falsified? And why would the Warren Commission accept the x-rays in spite of vigorous eyewitness testimony contradicting the photos? Dr. Cyril H. Wecht is an experienced coroner and former president of the American Academy of Forensic Science.
The autopsy on President Kennedy was extremely inadequate. It was inept, incompetent, and superficial by the most modest of standards that would be accepted in a good coroner or medical examiner's office in the United States of America today. The two people in charge at Bethesda, Commander Humes and Commander Boswell, had never done a single medical legal autopsy in their entire careers. The top civilian forensic pathologist in America, well known to the government, utilized by them in many different capacities during and following World War II, were all excluded because of their civilian status and the fact that they could not be counted upon to blindly and passively accept orders from military officers.
It is possible that the horror, shock, and chaos of the event created a momentary lapse among all of these professional pathologists, but that explanation doesn't satisfy serious investigators, particularly in light of the Zapruder film. Abe Zapruder, a bystander, was taking movies as the motorcade came through Dealey Plaza, and the film he took has become the center of tremendous controversy, not so much because of what it does show, but what it doesn't.
The presidential car coming up now. We know it's the presidential car. You see Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. There's a Secret Service man, spread eagle, over the top of the car. We understand Governor...
Dr. David Mandick, Jack White, other photographic experts have intensely studied the Zapruder film and have found evidence that it has been edited.
We do know, and it is a matter of record, that several frames were removed at one point in time and subsequently reinserted. So now we have a real question to deal with. Are we seeing the complete Zapruder film? Are there any frames that are missing?
Other vital evidence was destroyed on orders of the new president, Lyndon Johnson. Within 72 hours of the assassination, Johnson ordered the presidential limousine totally rebuilt and had an aide pick up Governor Connolly's bloody clothing, which was then cleaned and pressed before being turned over as evidence.
Quite apart from accusations of tampering with evidence, there's an even more sinister allegation. Many witnesses in Dealey Plaza claim to have been threatened by agents of the FBI. Was it just their imagination? Is there evidence that any of these threats were carried out?
In a 3-year period following the deaths of President Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, 18 material witnesses died. 6 were shot. 3 were killed in car accidents. 2 committed suicide. 1 had their throat slit. 1 died from a karate chop to the neck, and only 5 from what were deemed natural causes.
Could it be that all these deaths are just a coincidence? Or was there some kind of conspiracy? Is there any evidence to suggest that members of the FBI or the CIA participated in this appalling act? Is it possible that members of the military and President Kennedy's own government were a part of it? And perhaps the most important unanswered question of all, why? Why did conspirators, or Lee Harvey Oswald for that matter, why did anyone want to get rid of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy? Some thought-provoking answers in just a moment.
Encounters, with the unexplained.
All the inconsistencies of the report, altered photographs, conflicting and ignored eyewitnesses, the mind-numbing manipulations of the magic bullet, the sloppy pathology, the rush to clean up the car, all of these things over the years have kept the conspiracy theories coming, each one naming a new culprit. Some of these appear ridiculous on their face, but there are others that appear to have merit.
There is little question that by the time of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Central Intelligence Agency was running out of control. Documented CIA abuses include the overthrow of governments and assassination plots. The abuses of the agency horrified President Kennedy. He vowed to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. When John Kennedy fired CIA Chief Allen Dulles following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, it sent notice that the times were changing.
Extensive evidence has surfaced indicating Lee Harvey Oswald had worked or was working for the CIA. The question is, was Oswald working for the CIA on November 22, 1963? Or was he being set up as the patsy for the operation? Fletcher Prouty was the Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy years. Colonel Prouty did extensive study into the Kennedy assassination before he died recently.
When Colonel Prouty first read the stories about Lee Oswald, he recognized immediately that a cover story was being put out to the public. Lee Oswald was a designated patsy whether he ever fired at Kennedy or not. When a researcher showed Colonel Prouty some pictures taken in Dealey Plaza from November 22nd, one of them grabbed his attention. A bystander in one of the photos was a longtime friend and associate, General Edward G. Lansdale. Lansdale was a talented CIA man who masterminded various assassination plots for the agency.
Lansdale had been placed by Jack Kennedy in charge of Operation Mongoose, which were the attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro, and his appearance here suggests that he used one of his teams to take out Jack himself.
Was it really General Lansdale in Dallas? Was he coordinating events for the Central Intelligence Agency? Or was it mere coincidence that Edward Lansdale was in Dallas when the president was assassinated? Of course, the CIA was not the only agency that felt threatened by the JFK presidency. Conspiracy theorists and investigators have pointed out that both J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Baines Johnson stood a great deal to gain by the president's death.
FBI Director Hoover had everything to gain if John Kennedy was no longer president, as both John and Bobby Kennedy held his future in their hands. Hoover despised the bedroom antics of the Kennedys, but he was approaching mandatory retirement age and could only remain as FBI Director by presidential decree. But with John Kennedy as president, there was little chance of Hoover ever receiving that decree. With his close personal friend Lyndon Johnson as president, Hoover's chances were assured. No one had more to gain from the assassination of President Kennedy than his own vice president, Lyndon Johnson. Just days before Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Richard Nixon, who was also in Dallas, told news media there that Johnson would be dropped from the Democratic ticket in 1964. To complicate matters, there was a series of political scandals that were beginning to come to light regarding Johnson.
A decision that still troubles many today was an executive order signed by President Johnson that locked away an immense amount of assassination evidence in the National Archives until the year 2039. What's in these documents that had to be kept secret from the American people for 75 years? And what about another group the conspiracy theorists put on the list of those who would profit from Kennedy's death, the military? More nagging questions and a few surprising answers when we come back.
Encounters with the unexplained.
Few Americans realize the immense power wielded by the U.S. military. During the 1960 campaign, Kennedy promised to increase military spending, but once in office, he found out that vital information had been withheld from him. The Pentagon had told him that the Soviets possessed between 500 and 1,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles, but Kennedy found out it was less than 50. Kennedy felt this exaggeration was part of a deliberate strategy on the part of the Pentagon to keep their budget increasing. Kennedy made a serious attempt to bring the military and the intelligence agencies under control. In June of 1961, John Kennedy signed National Security Action Memorandum 55, which basically stated that all clandestine operations by any agency would come under the control of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and thus under the control of the President. Perhaps the final straw for the military came with National Security Action Memorandum 263, which President Kennedy signed in October of 1963. In this document, the President decreed that all U.S. military personnel would be out of Vietnam by the end of 1965. Just 4 days after Kennedy was killed, President Johnson signed National Security Action Memorandum 273, which reversed Kennedy's action and committed the U.S. to war in Vietnam. The most bizarre part of this issue is that the document Johnson signed was drafted on November the 21st, 1963, the day before Kennedy was assassinated.
The discovery of this bit of information set off an explosion of questions. Who drafted this document that was the complete reversal of the Kennedy memorandum? Did the author know that Kennedy would no longer be president after November 22nd? Did Johnson know about it? And whose interests were served by committing the U.S. to a war in Vietnam?
For a variety of reasons, the American military was very upset with Jack Kennedy. He had refused to invade Cuba at the time of the Bay of Pigs against the unanimous recommendation of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had signed an above-ground test ban treaty with the Soviet Union against their unanimous opposition. And now he was pulling American forces out of Vietnam, which, in their opinion, was turning the country over to the communists. He was making enemies of individuals and organizations of enormous power and unlimited resources.
While it is true that any of these agencies had the motive and means to assassinate the president, the key question is still, who had the power to subvert and misdirect any meaningful investigation after the assassination had occurred?
During 1963, there was serious talk against President Kennedy circulating within many groups, including organized crime, the CIA, big business and banking, and even the military. It is now known there were many connections among these groups. Once word of the strength of the anti-Kennedy feelings reached the ears of certain members in power, secret meetings were held and decisions were made. To keep public attention away from the real conspirators, a scapegoat was needed. Enter Lee Harvey Oswald.
One of the keys in the assassination was the removal of presidential protection that was supposed to be there in Dallas, augmenting the Secret Service. There's probably at least 200 men that would have been there from the 112th Military Intelligence Group. A serious breach of security was slowing the presidential limousine to take the unusually sharp turn from Houston onto Elm Street. The route that makes the most sense for the motorcade would have been to avoid Elm Street altogether and continue on Main Street directly to the Trade Mart.
Who made the last-minute decision to take the motorcade on that fatal route? Was President Kennedy deliberately driven into a textbook example of a killing zone? Is the evidence beginning to suggest we think the unthinkable, that perhaps all the agencies were involved?
The original plan most probably was built around the idea of one lucky shot striking Kennedy from the direction of the Texas School Book Depository. Other conspirators placed at various locations opened fire on the motorcade. The result was that many witnesses claimed that more than 4 shots were fired. Governor Connally even thought somebody was using an automatic rifle.
When Oswald was taken alive, it created a predicament for the conspirators. Although he was not a shooter, he had served as an intelligence agent for the United States and as an informant for the FBI. He knew too much. Jack Ruby, who had made local arrangements for the assassination on behalf of the mob, was called upon to deal with Oswald. With just one shot, the conspiracy was secure once again.
Within about an hour of the assassination, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president. And one of his first acts was to violate the laws of his own state by ordering Kennedy's body illegally removed from Parkland Hospital. The cover-up had begun. In the days and weeks following the assassination, witnesses were intimidated into silence, or they died under strange circumstances. Many people in Dallas claimed that this was not done by mob thugs, but by government agents. The facts are now undeniable. Hoover's FBI fabricated evidence, destroyed evidence, altered evidence, and intimidated witnesses.
We've been able to sample only a fraction of the evidence that has been gathered by scholars, theorists, and authors since 1963, and the Warren Commission report contains only a small portion of the information gathered by them and locked away. Given the breadth and enormous power of the entities involved, it seems unlikely the American people will ever know the full truth of the assassination of President Kennedy, though there are those who keep searching. In March of 2001, the Washington Post reported that a British magazine, Science and Justice, conducted an acoustical study from tapes of the assassination. Their conclusion was that there is a 96% chance that 4, not 3 shots were fired at Kennedy, and one of those was fired from the area of the grassy knoll. In light of all this new evidence, eyewitness testimony, scientific study, and all the contradictions within the Warren Commission report, can the American people ever hope to know the truth? Or might we be afraid of the truth and its implications, and we really don't want to know?